On today's episode of the Big Douglas Show, welcome two-thirds of the Ref the District guys. Nathan and Stoner joined the show. We talked about how they got the podcast started, how they became fans of the team, and a little bit, of course, about the upcoming season for the Commanders. As always, if you like today's episode, make sure that you follow the podcast, like the show, and leave us a comment. Tell us what you thought. We're always interested in the feedback. And now, without further ado, my conversation with Ref the District. All right, fellas, it feels like this has been a long time in the making. We weren't able to get all three of the Ref the District guys. We wish that we'd gotten there, but that's okay. We're going to have a good time today, fellas. Appreciate it.
In the words of Meatloaf, 2 out of 3 ain't bad.
That's right. Let's see. How did you guys get started?
Stoner and I have known each other for more than a decade. He was my boss in the Air Force when we were stationed out in Germany. Both Commanders fans, Redskins fans, of course, at the time. And we kept in touch and through our fandom over the years. And one day, it was 2.5 years ago at this point, I'd just kind of messaged him out of the blue. We're both living here in the beautiful state of Maryland. And I was just like, hey, we should do a show together because we're constantly bantering back and forth anyways. And both of us have, recording, video, and broadcast experience from our time in the Air Force. And he was like, sure, let's do it. And that was it.
Make no mistake, Doug, it was a drunken text.
Oh, it was totally a drunken text that I sent him. We were watching the playoffs and we were just, like I said, just bantering back and forth. And I drunkenly sent it out as just like, we should do a show. And he was like, yeah. And then like the next day or a couple days later, he messages me back and was like, oh yeah, that's right. I sent that.
Are there any other kind of texts?
Not good ones, boring ones, maybe.
Yeah. There's no doubt. Let's see. I wonder what the over-under is on podcasts that were started during COVID, because I think we kind of started around the same time. Mm-hmm. I think there were only YouTube's a separate world, right? I mean, those guys are over there doing interesting things and the algorithm, but just to put a podcast together, I think there were a lot of people that started with Anchor 2.5 years ago. Mm-hmm. And it's exploded. You couldn't even begin to count just the amount of Commanders podcasts there are right now. What is the key to staying relevant? Is that even part of the discussion? Do you do what feels right and then hope the rest comes? What is the outlook with so much out there right now?
Stoner, I don't know if you wanted to take that one. I know we've shared a lot of these thoughts over the years.
Yeah, I think the key really is that you have a love for not only what you're doing, Doug, but you have a love for what you're talking about. We have a love for the Commanders. We all do. And that's what we all have in common. And as long as you have that, then the rest of it just kind of falls in place. A lot of people say it, and maybe not everybody truly believes it. But do it because you love it, not because it loves you back. I know that's kind of a common saying. We do it first and foremost because we love to talk about the Commanders. We love to argue. We love hot takes. And so it's just fun. It's no different than if you're just out at the bar and you're talking with your boys about the Commanders or anything else in sports. So that's really the key. Love what you're talking about and what you're doing it, and have it be with people that you enjoy talking to it about.
Nathan, how long were you guys doing it before Trevor came on? How did you guys meet him? How did you guys, like you said, are longtime friends. So I could totally see where you'd have angst about bringing somebody in if the flow was already working,
Yeah. And Stoner and I have some pretty good chemistry from, again, over the years and the bonds that we've, built. And so we started in early of 2021, and training camp was that year, and they opened it up, and we wanted to meet some of the as you mentioned, there's a lot of wonderful content creators in this space. So we kind of was just like, hey, we're going to be there. And all of a sudden someone was just, we had these Ref the District shirts on. They're like, hey, that's Ref the District. And we turn around and it's Trev, and we just instantly hit it off with him. And Stoner and I had been talking that maybe a third voice would be nice, especially I was dealing with some health issues in 2021. to where like maybe I wasn't always going to be able to be on the show. And so it was maybe have somebody who could kind of come in and help out during that portion. And so we kind of had Trev come on in August just as a guest, like you are doing for us. And again, we just had some instant chemistry with him and built a bond where, we're family was what we talk about. And that's actually why he's not here. He's taking care of his mama stores right now. So shout out to Trev. But he was on one show and we're like, hey, come back again. And then we're like, you just want to do this full time with us. And, it's been a match made in heaven.
One of the things that I like about your guys' show, and it's something that I like being able to do on this one, although it is mostly a Commanders podcast, but I know that you fellas love the other sports in the district and talk about it fairly easily, which I respect. Stoner, let's start with you. Let's rank them. How do you rank them in your fandom?
Well,
of the four major DC sports, if you're a fan of all four, like grew up a Braves fan, so like there was no baseball team in DC, so I was not a Nationals fan. So
it's crazy. Yeah, it's crazy how when you look at all the Commanders fans and then you ask them what their other fandom is in the other sports, very rarely are they all for DC sports for a variety of reasons. We all know that DC is a melting pot of people coming from all over the world to work with federal government and such. And the same with Nathan. I mean, Nathan is a Commanders fan, but Wizards, whatever. He's an Oklahoma City fan. Caps, just because he's never had a hockey. I'm speaking for Nathan here.
Yeah.
But let me just say,
I'm ranking my teams.
Right. But make no mistake, I am through and through a DC sports fan. And so I love Commanders are always going to be number one. You ask anybody who's a sports fan in this area, and Commanders will always be number one. But I have a healthy love for the game of hockey as well. So I would put Caps number two. It helps that they just won 5 years ago today, as a matter of fact, is
that's right.
When they won. And then I think Wizards are number three. They probably would be number two if they had won in the last 45 years, but they've barely won. So it's hard to just have a love for them. And then four is just the Nationals, simply because they haven't been around as long as the other teams, although they've won the most recent championship.
And you were a partial season ticket holder.
With the Nationals as well. And
so were you an O's guy that became a Nats guy?
I wasn't. I mean, if I told you the whole story, Doug, it would probably make your head explode. But I've only been a DC only guy since about the year 2000.
Okay.
So, and it wasn't, I haven't been here that whole time. I was on and off, as Nathan said, with military duties all over the world. So I became that fan in around 2000 when Spurrier came, and I'm a Florida guy. So Spurrier got my fandom started. And then I lived about a mile from FedEx. So it came together. And then I just said, I'm going to be a DC sports guy, not a Baltimore guy in any way, even though I live in Baltimore, right outside of Baltimore. DC through and through. I find it hard to see guys, and I know you're a Braves fan, Doug, and Nathan's an Oklahoma City Thunder fan. And it just blows my mind that so many people are like that, and not just say, if I'm a Commanders fan, then I'm a Wizards, I'm a Caps, and I'm a Nats fan. That's me. I wish everybody else was like that.
Well, I grew up a Braves fan. So before I fell in love with football, I was in love with baseball.
And that's because the Nats weren't here yet?
Well, my grandparents are from retired in Georgia. My granddad was a Navy man. They have a supply school down there. So every summer we'd go down there. So in Athens, Georgia. So, usually I don't let Florida Gator guys onto the podcast at all, Stoner.
Where's my
really, you pulled a fast one on me. Yeah, we did not do our background check properly before we vetted the guest today. But no, so yeah, I started out it wasn't even DC. My dad was in the military, so we moved a lot, much to your point. So we kind of ended in DC, and so when I fell in love with football, it was with those early 90s Redskins. And thank goodness I got to get a little taste of that, because the rest of it is crazy. Nathan, I know you said it's funny, Stoner brings up Oklahoma City. I know you said you're heading out that way. How do you feel about fandoming from afar, particularly with the podcast? Because I know you guys go to a lot of events. I'm down here in North Carolina. It can be very frustrating to not have that hands-on access. Are you
it's going to be kind of a change, because this will be the first time moving away from the area since starting Ref the District. I'm a military brat. I grew up just like you, grew up with my dad in the Air Force, and so moved around and was never in the DC area until I got stationed up in Maryland, and was great. In fact, actually, the first time I was in Maryland was in 2011, which is actually when I became a Nationals fan, because I didn't have a baseball team. Because again, I grew up mostly overseas, and but I went to a Nationals game. They beat the Mets 2-1, and I was just like, okay, I'm a Nationals fan. I was like, we're doing.
Thank God they won that day.
Oh yeah,
what would have happened if they had lost?
I probably just would not have had any interest in baseball. But so the Nationals won, and just a random. It was I think like a Friday night game that we had gotten some tickets because we were military, and it was just like, all right, let's go and see this. And it was great. And so that's when I became a Nationals fan. I'm an Oklahoma City Thunder fan because I was in Oklahoma when they moved there, and it was awesome seeing the young trio grow up. Actually, Jeff Green was my favorite from the original trio. So good, good seeing him do some work there. But I love the DC area. I loved it when I got stationed here the first time. Actually made it back out here and was thankful this last time. But yeah, we're going to be moving to Oklahoma this summer because I'm retired now. You can see I'm no longer active duty Air Force.
Yeah, buddy.
And as far as like coming back and doing events, I'm going to try to do it as much as possible. One of the benefits to being retired, and I'm going to be retired, is I should have some extra time to be able to come back, but we'll see how the schedule plays out, because I also have, we're big on family, and I'm going to be taking care of my family first, and then, as time allows, coming back. But maybe, who knows, I'll win the lottery, Big Doug, and I'll be coming back for every game, every weekend, and just fly to and from.
That's right. You guys have had an incredible run of guests on the show. It's one of the things I appreciate is a guy that, that schedules guests, and the show kind of lives off of that, since I pretty much do it by myself. Can you think of a guest that you've had that stands out in your mind? Stoner,
pulling back the curtain, Doug. Nathan and I talk all the time offline where we say, that Doug, man, he pulls some excellent guests. You pull some great guests.
I pester people until they say yes.
Hey, man, that's how you got to do it.
Yeah.
I mean, we've had our fair share of good guests that we've really enjoyed talking to. And I think probably, man, let's just say that when we talked to 4 of the ladies who were part of the lawsuit against the Redskins at the time, and Daniel Snyder and the whole organization who spoke to the Washington Post, really eye-opening what they had to say, because they didn't hold anything back. They said, this is exactly what happened. These are the people that did it, and these are what we think the consequences should be. So I think that was really a point where we said, you know what? Not only are we having fun talking about the organization, the Redskins at the time, and the Commanders, but we can kind of do something that makes a little bit of difference. We know, let's not get crazy. It's all relative, but we think it made a little bit of difference in that it got their voice out there a little bit more, and maybe, just maybe, played a part in this whole thing where we are now, which is we're maybe weeks or maybe even a couple of months away from having a brand new owner. And those ladies are a big reason why that's happening. So we kind of feel like we played just a small part in that. So that was a huge guess.
Big respect to you guys. It was one at the time I had considered. They were making the rounds a little bit, and I just didn't feel comfortable with it. So I really take my hat off to some of you guys that did put your necks out there, because that ain't talking about football. You know what I mean? Like I sit around and talk about whether the quarterback's spinning it properly all day long. Those were some tough conversations that you guys had. And big ups to you for doing them.
And there was a risk of alienating the team too. We want to have access to players, to coaches, to front office folks, and we were risking possibly alienating that. But I think in the long run, it didn't, because we did it in a proper way. We did it in what we felt was a respectful way. We just weren't out there to trash the organization. We just wanted them to have another avenue for their voice to be heard.
Nathan, is there an interview out there you're still waiting to get?
I mean, we've been trying to book Coach Ron Rivera for a while. We've even gotten as desperate as to kind of put out the veteran card a little bit. And so that's probably the one that I think that it's kind of eluded us. We've had it in the books a couple times, and then it's been, hey, sorry, he's actually gonna, just stick to media events. And so we're going to keep trying. We'll see how long Ron's with the team, but we're going to keep that one. But that one's been eluding us, and really would be nice to have him on the show.
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty much the pinnacle of the
That's
deal.
our white whale, right?
Yeah, that's right. Hey, if you're going to set lofty goals, let's set lofty goals, right?
That's right.
I love it. Let's get into a little bit of the season as it's starting. It'd be easy to just say, what's the biggest concern on your mind, and then we go straight to quarterbacks. Let's not do that. That seems fairly easy. So Nathan, let's start with you. What are your biggest concerns heading into the season? Not named Sam Howell.
Yeah, if it's not with the QB, it's going to be still the offense, right? So we know this defense can come out and perform, and I expect the defense to still be a top 10 unit, maybe even better. I mean, this was a really solid unit last year. The year before, it kind of had a dip, and then the first year with Jack Del Rio was really good. So now we just need the offense. But this is a broken record, Doug. Every season we go in, if the offense could just be mid, we'd win double-digit games. Well, is EB going to actually be able to transcend? We're hearing great things right now, but this is the time where we're supposed to be hearing great things. So if the enemy is the guy and he can transform this offense, regardless if it's Sam Howell or Brissett back there or Jake, from State Farm, if as long as if this offense can actually finally make that jump, because we know that they have the skill positions, then the skill at the skill positions, then that is the biggest concern for me. Like if they come out and they're scoring 25 points a game, which I think is just above league average.
They didn't average 20 last year. Let's put it like that.
They were under 20 last year. League average, I think, is around 24. So if they even just scoring 24, 25 points a game, I mean, that would alleviate my biggest concern, because this has been, we want that defensive identity, but you got to be able to score points to win in the NFL.
What does it say? I've actually been talking about this the last couple of episodes. What does it say about Ron Rivera that he says, listen, what kind of set does it take to bring in Eric Bieniemy, right? Who could easily, if everything goes right, take your job, but you know that you've got to get over 20 points. What's the best way to do that? They went out and got the best offensive innovator they could get. Now, were there better options? I don't know. Does it seem like we're heading in the right direction with Bieniemy? It does, but I think Ron needs a little more credit in, think about it. If Jay Gruden had ever done that with a defensive coordinator, how good could some of those teams have been?
Sure.
He didn't have the heart to do it, I don't think, because I think he was always concerned one of those guys, a Wade Phillips type guy, could end up taking his job. What kind of credit does Ron deserve for making this move, knowing he needed something?
It's his last stand, Doug, and he knows it. He knows it better than any of us. And I'm sure there's not people standing there saying it's your last chance, because there's nobody to say that right now. But he knows it. He knows, with ownership change, with 3 consecutive years of a non-winning record, he knows it's his last dance. He's got to do whatever it takes. And obviously his biggest weakness was the offense. So bring in the offensive coordinator. And I think that played a big role. I know there's a lot of rumors that he wanted to keep Heineke, but maybe Heineke got a little bit more money from the Falcons. And so his plan B was Brissett. I think he wanted a guy like Brissett, a guy that he knows that if this whole Sam Howell experiment falls flat, he's got a guy he can depend on, a veteran guy that can win those games that he needs to win. So I think it says a lot about his plan going into this. Same reason for signing Daron Payne, I think, because really that's a lot of money in your 2 defensive tackles. Same reason for giving Chase a pass for missing OTAs. He needs Chase Young. He's doing everything right now of not a desperate guy, but a guy who knows it's his last chance to win if he wants to keep his job. Because we've been talking about this a lot, Doug, and I'm curious what you think as well. How many wins is it going to take for him to keep his job?
Yeah, I mean, I think he's got to get to the playoffs and maybe win one. There's 2 questions that I'll toss back to you. Mm-hmm. If the ownership situation wasn't in flux last year and there wasn't this like idea that maybe things were changing, does he get fired right after the Browns game last year? Does he make it through last season when he gets on the podium and says, "Oh, really? We were in it, or we needed this one to win"? Like, does he make it to the end of last year? And I think the better question is, at least this is the one I've been asking people on the show, is let's not do. I think most people, when asked what does it take for Ron to stay, well, it takes winning. But if we put winning to the side, how would you steel man the argument? Like if you're Ron Rivera and new ownership comes in and says, "All right, what's going on here? Why should you stay?" What is the argument Ron makes without take winning out, right? What is Ron's plea, Nathan, to ownership? What does he say that convinces them he's the man for the job?
Well, to answer your question, your first question there, and whether or not he gets fired, I don't think he gets fired after Browns, but if there wasn't the ownership kind of cloud and the change that's coming with it, I do think that he doesn't coach this season for the Burgundy and Gold. And I do think that they instead would hire someone like Bieniemy to be the head coach here. Dan Snyder, if Dan Snyder was still the owner and everything, or the ownership change happened before, because again, he's had 3 non-winning seasons in a row, and it's just he's done enough to kind of put Washington into the place, but he's not bringing over the hump. So now he's going to have another season to prove that he is the guy. And winning aside, he needs to actually show progress within the team, and the EB hire is big. If that shows that the offense is there, that they can still win. If, I believe he still has the locker room. These are guys who absolutely will run through a brick wall for him. So if he can show how much value he has as far as being a coach, I mean, I know he was ranked 19th in that coach list, but I mean, he does a lot of the things outside of winning that you want your head coach to do. And that's what he's got to show to Harris and, whoever is going to be president of football operations and everything, to be like, no, look at what we're building. I get it's been a slow start. We've turned the corner and we're going to get there. But it doesn't matter how much he pleads that and can show that, if they're, 0-7, he's not making it to the end of the season.
No, that's right. He would not make it to the end of the season if they start. And they typically start out slow. And I've yet to have anybody come on the show and explain to me why they do that every year. Not here, go back to Carolina. Not with this OC, go back to the last OC. Not with this defensive coordinator, go back to Steve Wilks. I mean, they start out very slow every year, and he certainly can't afford to do that. Stoner, I'm curious, as we're having this Ron conversation, when they first hired him and gave him all the control, I thought it was a terrible idea. I don't understand how you can be the head coach whose job is to win football games right now, and be the president of football ops whose job is to make sure that the team wins in the future, right? Like, why would you take a 2nd round pick for Chase Young right now when you need Chase Young on the field to win football games? However, if this team ain't going anywhere fast, then that 2nd round pick becomes fairly valuable.
Sure.
I'll say this, though, and I'm curious your thoughts. I think he has done a better job of being both things than I really thought you could do. Like, coaches don't even want it. Andy Reid made sure to bring in a GM when he got that job. That's why the only man still doing it is Belichick. And you could argue whether he's actually done a good job up there of constructing the roster. But the roster feels like, minus quarterback, it is much better than when he got here.
Absolutely.
I guess this is give Ron credit day, but does Ron deserve more for wearing both hats than he's probably gotten?
Absolutely. He deserves a lot of credit for, as you said, Doug, for doing both jobs and not necessarily excelling, but doing a good job at it. But there are some conflicts, and I think Chase is a great example of that. If you could get a second-round pick for Chase Young right now, you'd take that in a heartbeat.
Which sounds crazy.
Which sounds crazy. But based on his contract situation, his production, his injury history, all that, that would be great for next year. And the coach who's going to be here next year. But Ron doesn't want to do that. Ron needs Chase Young right now to be a game wrecker from the edge. So that's the conflict. And I'm sure it's happened on multiple times over the last couple of years. And maybe quarterback was a situation that it happened as well. But having said that, he has done a really good job of setting the team up pretty well for the future. He just hasn't figured out the quarterback position. And that's ultimately going to be his failure if he doesn't last past this year. Is Ron the personnel guy who has bemoaned to the press that quarterback is the biggest reason they're in the position that they are? He's the guy who is responsible for getting that quarterback. And he's tried and he's tried and he's failed and he's failed and he's failed.
And he's tried.
He has tried. Ryan Fitzpatrick, Carson Wentz. These are attempts to fill it. And you see the way that they've built the team. And I understand and can appreciate the approach to this, right? Like, build up the team around it and then get the quarterback who can take you over the edge there.
I think that's an excuse, though. I think that's the what do you call it? The vision, the 20. Vision post hindsight.
I'm going to let you just stumble upon your words.
No, I'm just going to say it's hindsight's 20. He says that now, but if he had a chance to get
from
Russell
the very
Wilson,
beginning, they said that, Stoner. From the very beginning, they said that they wanted to build this team and that that's why they're going with the vet approach. And they swung and missed. Ryan Fitzpatrick. I was really excited about Ryan Fitzpatrick. Not that he was going to be amazing, but that I thought he was going to be a good bridge for us. And he plays.
And people were excited about this team with Fitzpatrick.
Yeah, and then Carson Wentz. I was never excited about Carson Wentz. I said that hands down the best part of that from the get-go. And Stoner, you back me up on this. From the get-go, I said the best part of this deal is the fact that you don't restructure it. You pay $28 million. If he's the guy, then great, you got him for a couple more years. If he's not the guy, you cut bait and you're free of anything. Do I like giving up a couple third-round picks for Carson Wentz? No. Did I think Carson Wentz was the guy? No. But at least it was a prove-it deal. And they thought, like, hey, maybe this would work. And it turns out Scott Turner and Carson Wentz, not the guys here in Washington. Ron Rivera's done a good job, Doug, like you said, building up this roster and trying. And whether or not Sam Howell or Jacoby Brissett are going to be the guy are really going to be the biggest factors for whether or not he stays.
The other factor, and to me, this is his biggest mistake, is if Justin Fields pans out, that was it. They had that opportunity. The Bears gave up one extra first-round pick to go up there and get him. You basically would have given up Jamin Davis and Jahan Dotson and for Fields. And I get you like both those players, but if Justin Fields turns out to be a cornerstone quarterback, again, to your point earlier, Stoner, that's the deal. That's why Ron, if he doesn't get extended, was because they never got quarterback right. And I don't care how good you are at coaching. I don't care how good your roster is, as we've seen, because the roster was pretty good last year. If you got Taylor Heineke slinging the ball, that's it. That's it pigeonholes you into how good you can be. And that's been his problem. And to your point, it's not for a lack of trying, because Lord knows he's taken a swing or two every year since he's been here, and they just hadn't been able to get it. Curious, Stoner, we'll start with you. I'd like both of your opinions on this. Twitter question yesterday was rank the last three coaches we've had here. We've got Gruden, Shanny. We're not talking about Shanny's overall work because that makes that too easy.
So just here in Washington.
Just his time here in Washington, Gruden and Shanahan. Stoner, why don't we start with you?
You can't go by record alone. That's unfair to do that, to just look at the records and see who had the best winning percentage. And so it's a little bit difficult because of what Ron has done with the franchise and built it into a team that is no longer somebody you can run over, except for the quarterback position. He's done it everywhere else. I think Ron should be number one on that list and now we are a respectable franchise throughout the league because of everything that he has put in place. And then you have to go Shanahan. Just 2012 alone gets him a lot of respect because of what he did with RG3 and changing him into the running quarterback. Jay Gruden, he was just over his head. I think he was just a guy who wanted to go out there and a lot like Spurrier. He just wanted to kind of have some fun and go out there and hopefully he can win. And if not, he's going to go to the bar.
He had the longest tenure here.
Yeah, he did that. And that was a huge mistake to extend him after his third year when again, there was chaos with the whole McLuhan thing. And
a lot of that, this might be tinfoil hattish of me here, but a lot of the long tenure for Gruden stemmed from the fact that, remember, up to that point, the Dan Snyder had this reputation of just mowing through coaches, including a Hall of Fame coach and Shanahan. That he got rid of Gibbs after 4 years. Well, Gibbs kind of stepped down, but that was kind of a mutual departure, right? So, I mean, the media, and we all know Dan focuses too heavily on the media. And so he was just like, well, I got to change the mindset that I can't stick with a coach for a while, even if they're not doing the things I want them to. And so Gruden kind of stuck around longer. And you see this a lot with Dan Snyder throughout his tenure, where it was just like he swung big early for all the big names, and they're like, oh, the Redskins they spin big in free agency, and then they're like, all of a sudden it was shifting away from that, and with the players and everything. So that Gruden thing, the fact that he was just happened to be the longest tenure was just because, in my opinion, was because Dan Snyder was trying to change the mantra that was around him, just firing coaches routinely. I do think Gruden gets a bad rap, and he was getting lit up in that thread of yours, Doug. I was surprised to see how many people just really disliked
too. Though I was surprised.
Oh, he did.
He had some exciting teams. I do think that Shanahan deserves, one or two based off of 2012 alone. The most excitement most of us have had under Dan Snyder was that RG3 rookie season 2012, where we just really thought like we had finally arrived. So, I mean, he's probably one or two. And then I think Gruden gets a bad rap, but I'm not about to give him the one seed here. Ron Rivera, like you said, Stoner, has just done a lot. And I've likened Ron Rivera's position very similarly to a former head coach of the Washington Redskins, which is George Allen. George Allen never took Washington to the promised land, but the Washington Redskins franchise, when George Allen took over, was abysmal. And he brought them back into relevancy. And I think that's what Ron Rivera's legacy will be here in Washington, even if he never wins a Super Bowl for the Burgundy and Gold. It's going to be that he transitioned us out of the dark cloud that is Dan Snyder. And that's what he needs to be given credit for, because on the field, we haven't had a lot of excitement. I mean, there's been a couple, Heineke games. There's been a couple of these wow moments, but the biggest thing is we just needed to get out of where we were as a franchise, and Ron Rivera's done that. So I'd probably go Shanahan just for 2012, then Rivera for the culture change. And I don't take it lightly to put Jay Gruden last, because he was probably the most consistently successful.
It's crazy. If Alex Smith doesn't get hurt that year, they're headed to the playoffs for the third time in 3 years. And that's all the while knowing that they could have kept Cousins if they'd have just paid him up front, and Allen wasn't willing to give out the fully guaranteed contract. I mean, that team was humming. Those offenses were rolling. So I think it's interesting. It's an interesting discussion simply because you're talking about guys that didn't do very well.
Right. All three. Yeah.
I'm curious when the news came down that Snyder's out, family stepping down, they're going to sell. I really thought, like as many of us, that if that day happened, it'd be dancing out on the streets, and that's not at all how I felt when it happened. And I'm curious how you guys thought. To me, is as much jubilation as I thought I was going to feel. It more was just like a big sigh. And I thought that was, as I reflected after, on some of these podcasts and with different people about what we expected to feel in the moment. That's what I think. And I think most people were thinking it was going to be some kind of great excitement. Did you find the joy in it as much as you thought you did, Nathan? And maybe I'm thinking.
That's how I felt. That was the joy and jubilation, Doug, when it came to that there. Yeah. And it's just because, again, I even though I'm not a DMV native, right? I mentioned I'm an Air Force brat. I grew up a Redskin fan. Like I've been a Redskin fan my whole life. There's never been another team for me. And my first memories of football were of the Super Bowl championships. And I liked Norv Turner years. I thought we were still a good team during all of that mess. And then Dan Snyder. I'm only 38 years old. So the majority of my fandom, though, has been Dan Snyder. And so the things that, we mentioned, the No Voice Goes Unheard interviews that we had on our channel, like just everything that was Dan Snyder has not been good for the team. So to just be able to remove. Now I understand. And I think where there's some relief and not necessarily a complete, joyous parade moment is we still have to win football games, right? We're not out of the woods yet. Also, the sale hasn't happened. Like we're just kind of, Stoner has been waiting for the rug to be pulled out from underneath us. Trev's been the same way. And it's just like, to me, I'm like, I can see the baby steps and we're getting there. And so to me, there was, I agree that it was more relief than it was all the joy. And I love the little button and the joke for it, but I completely understand that it's more relief at this point, and we'll still have that parade when the pen goes or when the ink goes to paper. But right now it's football season starting. And I think we just want to win football games.
Yeah, it'd be nice to win some football games. So if we assume that Forbes is the starter simply because of draft rank and capital, let's just say on the right side, who starts on the left side? Because I think this is an interesting question, and I totally had my mindset in one direction, and then we did one of these episodes on Monday, and Adam and Eva, I believe it was, totally flipped my mind on this thing. So I'm curious your thoughts before I give mine.
Well, I can promise you this: I'm not going to flip you back, or I'm not going to flip you in any certain direction, because when you have 3, possibly 4 quality football players, defensive backs on this team now, which to me, don't get me started. I think it's too many, but okay. So you've got 4, you've got Quan and you've got Forbes and you've got BSJ and you've got Fuller. I just want the guy who is in camp and is impressing the coaches the most. I want him. I don't want there to be any politics involved. I don't want it to be a contract situation with, say, Fuller or whatever. I don't want it to be they get it by default because of injury. I don't want it to be, well, he's your first round pick. That should be that guy. All of those things. I don't want any of that to play into it. I want guys to go out there and bust their tails and battle. And the best man who's for the job is going to be the guy who's starting. I don't want it to be any of that outside influence. Just give me the guy who is, Terry McLaurin says at the end of camp, says, this guy is going to be a baller. He's the guy that should be out there. I'm obviously exaggerating. McLaurin doesn't make those decisions, but I want him to have an influence on those because he saw it every day in camp. So I'm not going to tell you specifically who I think is going to be there, but I want it to be the guy who outplays everybody in camp.
Get off the fence.
That is it.
Get off the fence. It's Forbes and Fuller, by the way, is the answer.
Sort of just trust Wade the question all the way down to the.
I
Yeah,
did.
yeah,
I did, and that's
totally.
fine.
When you pick up the ball and tell me who plays
Forbes
opposite
and
of-
Fuller. It's to me, it's the obvious choice when it comes to that. Forbes and Fuller. I know a lot of people fantasize about Fuller being a slot guy because he was a slot guy for the Redskins, and then they got traded and he played in a couple positions in Kansas City. Ever since he's returned to this team, he's been an outside corner, and he's actually been pretty darn good. I get that people don't want to give him his flowers because he might be like the top 25 to top 32 cornerbacks in the league. That's still your CB1. And Forbes, for what it's worth, I don't think he's going to get the position just because he's the first round draft pick. I just think that he is that good. I think that he's going to win this job outright. What's going to be interesting is whether or not they want Benjamin St-Juste to go inside or if they like Quan Martin more inside. And that's the battle that I'm kind of interested, because I do think when all said and done, as Stoner decreed, the best guys are going to win your outside spots, and that's going to be Forbes and Fuller. I just think that they are the best cornerbacks that Washington has on the books right now. And I disagree with Stoner. I don't think 4's too much. This is a passing league. You need your 1 through 4 to be good because they're going to be out there quite often. If not them, your safeties, and we've got a pretty good safety room as well.
Nickel about 75% of the time last year.
Sure.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm excited to get all 4 of those guys out there on the field, and I'm happy if BSJ is my third corner. I'm happy all day of the week.
Well, let me just kind of throw this out there for you in BSJ. That's right. We like doing it. You had a top 3 passing defense last year. You had a bottom 5 offense. And so your first 2 picks in the draft for this year are defensive backs, are passing defense players. That just doesn't make sense to me. Although I felt we needed a corner, I just didn't think we needed 2 corners in a row, or corners / safety, whatever you want to call Quan there. But I just don't like the philosophy of my offense is terrible, my defense is great, so let's add to the defense. That part didn't make sense to me. So that's why I just had a problem with the second round pick.
I think they'd have liked to have the right tackle from Tennessee, who with the Bears, I think, ended up taking way super high. Nobody said it. Talk about the biggest riser in the draft. I mean, nobody had that guy in the first round when we started the process. He's going top 10. I think that's who they'd have liked because you could have plugged him in immediately. The problem
Darnell,
with,
right?
Yeah, thank you. The problem with going, like, say, Broderick Jones, which was the pick 2 picks ahead of us, would have made a lot of sense. But I don't know that he plays immediately. You know what I mean? Like, does he beat Charles Leno in camp? Maybe not. Charles Leno hasn't been that bad. So I that's probably part of the reason they didn't go that route, because the offensive players weren't going to be immediately impactful. We talk about, not Ron needing it now, not investing. Like Roderick Jones to me was an investment pick. And the interesting thing was when you take Forbes, and that's kind of part of the conversation we're having here. And I said it immediately. We were watching this with my brother, I think. As soon as they took Forbes, they had to take a slot corner in the second round. Because to me, to your point, Kendall can't do it anymore. And as much as people keep trying to tell me that Benjamin St-Juste can, I don't think he can. I think he needs that boundary line to help him with coverage. And I said it immediately. As soon as they took Forbes, I said, well, they're going to have to draft a nickel in the next round. So I think that's Quan Martin. I think it's his job to lose. I think I would have taken Branch from Alabama at the time. Where I was higher on him. When I talked to Jim Nagy, though, he says that Quan Martin has the biggest upside. And we've seen that the Commanders and Ron Rivera have certainly swung on upside. They either take the Brian Robinsons of the world or the Quan Martins and the Jeremy Davises, right? Where it's just like all clay,
they love that RAS score, right? The athletic score. They and that's where Quan Martin beats out Branch, who I think is a very cerebral player coming out of Alabama. You love those Alabama guys. But Quan Martin is just physically gifted, and also what they need in this is why Stoner, even if you have the top 3 passing defense, you take these guys. They weren't tops in turnovers, and both Quan Martin and Forbes are known for getting that ball, and that would help out your offense as well, giving them shorter fields. This is what this is. It all works together.
Good points. Good points.
We'll wrap on this one. This was an interesting nugget that somebody brought to the beautiful thing about these shows is that you bring people on that know more than you do, and then you steal their information, and then you just look really smart to people. So I actually wish I could remember who told me this, but McKinnon for the Chiefs last year was second on the team in receiving touchdowns with 9.
Yep.
Does that make you excited that we will finally see the Antonio Gibson that they promised us for 3 or 4 years now?
I'll let the truther, Antonio Gibson truther.
I love me some Antonio Gibson. I thought he was going to be phenomenal last year. I thought that was going to be his breakout season. Now I'm going to double down on it. Because he is just a talent. I know he hasn't had a whole lot of explosive plays here with Washington. A lot of that's been marred by poor offensive line play, but you're hearing it in minicamp right now. The screen game is coming back. We've been so awful under Scott Turner with the screen game. If EB can get Gibson that ball in space, he is an absolute weapon. And I do think we're going to see some exciting things. If I had to hedge my bets here, him and Curtis Samuel are going to be playing in a very similar space, in my opinion. And so that's where maybe both of them just have good seasons, but maybe not great seasons. But I said last year, even though everyone was on the Brian Robinson train, I said Antonio Gibson's going to be the most productive back by the end of the season. And he was. Now, granted, there was a 4-game injury for Brian Robinson, but even still on efficiency wise, they were right there on pace with each other. And so Antonio Gibson is a player I expect to see big things from, and then he's going to go get a paycheck somewhere else. Quite possibly Curtis Samuel as well. But yeah, Gibson's going to have a really solid year. Maybe not, 1,000, yards rushing or passing or anything or receiving, but I would expect him to have probably close to 12 to 1,400 yards from scrimmage, because he's just going to be a tool that EB is very excited for using.
Yeah, and I agree, Doug. I'm a big Gibson guy as well. I'm a big believer in him. I mean, I called Brian Robinson a jag at the end of the year last year. I know I was going a little overboard calling him just a guy, but Gibson is I think Gibson is the key to this entire offense outside of Sam Howell, of course, because he can do all of those things that were displayed so well in Kansas City with a lot of different backs and a lot of different positions. He can do all those things. He has that ability. So barring injury, he's going to be the key to this entire offense. Terry's going to get his. Jahan's going to get his. Brian Robinson's going to run the ball a lot more. Antonio Gibson is the key to this entire offense being effective when it needs to be. And I think that also correlates to a lesser role for Curtis Samuel. Now, if Gibson gets hurt, if he has some sort of injuries, then maybe Samuel kind of fits into that role. But I think Samuel's role is going to be lessened quite a bit because of the Gibson factor. I think EB's got a lot of big plans for Antonio Gibson, and I'm here for it because I'm a big believer in him as well.
Yeah, it'll be fascinating to see what the offense looks like. It was a running back and tight end dominated offense in Kansas City. Mm-hmm. Well, look at the personnel that they had, Exactly. So like, I don't think it's a stretch to say that the receivers that they have on this, that EB has on this roster, much better, at least deeper than what they had at Kansas City, at least the last 2 years. Now, I'm not saying we necessarily have a Tyreek Hill on the team. I think we have close. Hard to compare with Tyreek Hill, but what I'm getting to is you could see how they kind of morphed the offense into who was getting the screens and who was getting the tunnel passes, depending on who was there. So what I'm hoping we also see, I think we're going to see a lot of 21 personnel where you get to move Gibson all over the field, which I like. But I hope also we'll be moving Terry all over the field. I hope we're moving Dotson all over the field. And Samuel all over the field. I'd like to see Samuel line up wide outside more often. I think he can do that, taking the top off. But I think that'll be interesting. The biggest thing is, to me, is to see what EB does with this personnel grouping, because it's much different than what they had in Kansas City. and that's because there's only a couple of Travis Kelce's around, and
Sure.
I
don't think
like
there's
our
any.
tight end room. That's a conversation for a different podcast. As I see, we're at an hour here already, which is incredible because it feels like 10 minutes. So, I think with that, fellas, I'll say thank you so much for doing this. Should have happened a long time ago. We won't wait as long until the next one. And
Absolutely.
please tell Trev that I said hello.
Will do.
And Doug,
Thanks for having us on.
yeah, and just want to say we're a big fan of your work, and we appreciate you having us on as well.
Well, I appreciate you guys. Thanks, man.